Passion, purpose, possibilities. They're all right there. But sometimes we need a little push. And that's where SheSez comes in. Think of it as a master class taught by the world's most interesting women, sharing stories and ideas, because girlfriends help each other. This is SheSez with Linda Grasso. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SheSez. Our guest today is movie producer Suzanne Farwell. Suzanne has produced some of the most successful comedies of the past 15 years, including two of my own personal favorites, It's Complicated and Something's Got to Give. Also on Suzanne's credit lists, The Holiday and The Intern, both of which you might have seen. She made both those pictures with her mentor, writer, director, and producer Nancy Meyers. She started working with Nancy when she was in her 20s. She was a production assistant, but before long, she started producing, co-producing, and executive producing. After The Intern, Suzanne decided to strike out on her own, and everything changed. There was no production deal, no production company, no nest of any kind. Essentially, Suzanne had to redefine her career in Hollywood, and that's a town that doesn't make it easy for women over 40. But she was able to make a critical pivot, and she dove in, ultimately forming her own production company, Resonant Entertainment, with two partners. Resonant is geared toward making movies specifically for the female audience, and their first movie, Give or Take, a comedy drama, Suzanne is not only producing, but directing. Suzanne Farwell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Such a thrill to have you here. And the first thing I want to talk about is a personal note, and that is I decorated my entire home stealing from Something's Got to Give and It's Complicated. What I could afford, what was in my income level.
You're not alone. That movie spawned many a kitchen. I think a few websites telling people where to buy the rug from the living room and get the kitchen just right. So
just out of curiosity, and I know this from talking to you, but share this with our listeners. That's not your decor sensibility. That was, I guess, more Nancy's.
It's Nancy's. I love it as well. It's our production designer, John Hutman, is extremely talented and did a beautiful job on that film. But yes, Nancy's personal taste is reflected in all of her films.
So take me back to that moment when you decided, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I sort of called it a production nest, a production deal. It's certainly not to say that your job was easy or cushy. Being a movie producer is really hard work. But you had a safety net around you.
Yes.
And, you kind of cruised through your 20s and 30s with that. And then suddenly, I believe in your early 40s, everything changed. Take me back to that moment.
Sure. Yes. I mean, I began my career with a studio deal in place, working for Nancy, running her company, Waverly Films at Sony. And all the films that I had produced until Carrie Pilby most recently they were all studio pictures. So for Sony, Warner Brothers, Universal. And it's, they were big budget films and yes, all films are hard work, but it's easier when you have a larger budget and you have an infrastructure in place. What happened was after The Intern, that's not true. When we were having trouble getting The Intern made, and that was because the studios have really all but abandoned the people movies in favor of anything with man in it, like Iron Man, Superman, Spider-Man, Aquaman. It's
so
just
frustrating to me as a movie lover.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it was hard to get, even with Nancy's incredible track record, it was hard to get that movie made. So while that was, I was frustrated and wondering, what are the movies that I've wanted to make over the past, of my career that maybe didn't get made because it's so hard to get those kinds of films made at the studio level now. And one of them was Carrie Pilby. It was a book that I had read 15 years before and fell in love with, and finally just decided to take the leap and option the book. And that began my first independent filmmaking experience. So
when I was speaking to you before and I said, wow, at that, critical juncture, how did you feel? And you said terrified.
I was terrified. The entire experience of making Carrie Pilby was outside of my comfort zone from minute one. I mean, optioning the book on my own, with a partner actually, but
there were lots of new things that you were doing.
Having to raise money. I mean, I was raised in a family where you don't even discuss money. You don't ask. It's just it's uncouth, and so this was a new experience where to make an independent film, you have to go out there and you're raising money, you're finding equity and capital, and we started it with a Kickstarter campaign, which is something completely outside of my wheelhouse. So yeah, from minute one, it was uncomfortable and it was scary the entire way, but it was also the most exhilarating thing I'd ever done.
Yeah, I want to touch on that for a second because I think beginnings at any time in your life when you're trying something new, it's scary. Correct me if you don't agree with me, but or not correct me, but just agree with me. I feel like beginnings are harder as you get older, trying new things. Why is that? I mean, because we should be doing new stuff all the time.
Right. I mean, you should be taking our experience and that should be really valuable. And for some reason, and especially in Hollywood, I think age is seen as not in our favor. So I refused to believe that. And I was afraid, but I felt a certain confidence because I knew how much experience I had. I knew what I knew. I also knew what I didn't know. So that made it scary. But I partnered with people who had experience in independent film. And I surrounded myself with a team that made me feel like we could all bring our individual talents to the table.
Was there ever any moment that you thought about not doing it? I mean, because I'm sure it was really hard. I'm sure you got a lot of no's. I mean, as successful as you were at that time, and I mean, let's face it, those movies, you're more successful than 90% of all women producers. But even so, I'm sure you had a lot of rejection, right?
A lot of rejection. It was very difficult to raise the equity to get the movie made. We finally had people who came in and championed it. We had the National Bank of Canada came in and financed the vast majority of it. But I also had to personally raise almost $1 million in equity from people I knew. And so that was really challenging. I mean, there were many times. We were a week out from starting to shoot in New York, and we found ourselves with a shortfall in the budget. And our line producer came in and said something had changed with one of the guilds or unions were requiring us to have. And we had a production meeting the next day, and I looked at my producing partner and said, "Do you mean if we don't come up with this $250,000 like overnight that the movie's not going to go?" And he said, "Yeah. That's what happens in independent film." And at that moment, my intention was so strong. That wasn't going to happen. I was not going to send all those people home and not make this movie. We were a week out from shooting. We had Nathan Lane, we had Gabriel Byrne, we had Belle Powley, we had everything ready to go. And it had been a labor of love for 3 years. And that was a lesson for me. And I literally started dialing for dollars and raised the money overnight. And I mean, literally overnight. So that was one of those things where I think if you believe it and it was just, that was not an option. That was not going to happen.
I also find that myself personally, when I put myself out there and I'm afraid and I'm able to
push through the fear,
it's a huge confidence booster, much more so than when I kick back and I do all the stuff that I really need to do. If I do stuff that terrifies me.
Yes.
And I mean, honestly, I wasn't terrified in starting SheSez, but I was intimidated.
Of course.
Because, it was a new beginning. And obviously I had a lot of experience, interviewing people and doing it live, but it was something new. How would it be perceived? Could I really do it? What if I failed?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, so Carrie Pilby was the beginning, as you said, of sort of the new chapter in my career. And I was in my early 40s when that experience began. But getting through that, and as you said, pushing through the fear, doing it anyway, and coming out the other side, having accomplished it, gave me such a sense of confidence and really inspired me to take the leap that I've just taken in starting Resonate with my two partners. And, this is something I walk into our office every day sort of in awe that we've created this thing. And, just out of sheer will, but collectively through our experience and through our resumes and we've built enough of a shared history and experience to bring something really valuable to the table. And we have a vision to make films for the female audience that we know and understand is a niche that's being ignored, which is, as I mentioned, is what inspired me to even make Carrie Pilby. So it's all related, and the sky's the limit. Our goal ultimately is to be a a mini studio with films for the female audience. So
I love that. Suzanne, how critical was it for you finding the right partners? You took on 2 partners. Tell me how that was a game changer for you.
Hugely important. We came together on Carrie Pilby. Susan Kartsonas is one of my partners, and she's a very well-known and respected producer. She produced What Women Want. She produced The Duff. She's Aquamarine. She's produced a lot of very female-driven films, and she's known in the industry for that being sort of her specialty. So our interests were aligned in that sense, and we both understand and understood that this is a real opportunity, that money's being left on the table in Hollywood, and it's not only an economic issue, but it's a passion of ours to make more of these films. We brought Brent Emery, who's an established indie producer, on. I had never made a movie with a budget less than $35 million. Carrie Pilby was $3.5 million. I was like, wait, the decimal point's in the wrong place. What's happening?
I want to know what craft services was like at that table.
Not so good. It was a different experience than any movie I'd made before. I'll put it that way. But Brent was a real independent finance expert, and he handled it on the high level, but also really took me along and taught me. It's been like graduate school for me in terms of learning about independent filmmaking and independent film finance and things that I had never even had to think about. When you make a movie for a studio, they hand you a check essentially, and you go make the movie. This was a completely different thing, that the movie had to be put together, and it's very, very complicated. So I feel inspired and exhilarated by that learning experience too. As you said, you come out of something difficult, things that I never even really wanted to be bothered with, but I had to in a very organic way.
I think many women don't realize how important finding the right partner is. I certainly do. I've had ideas and circulated, and I think a lot of my women friends talk about wanting to do something, in midlife or after raising kids in their late 30s when the kids are in school and wanting to do something. And I think sometimes finding the right partner is what you need to lift off. I mean, not always. I'm not going to broad brush it.
Well, I can tell you, in our instance, it's exactly true. And I know I wouldn't have the confidence to do this alone. You need each other. You need to hold each other accountable. You need the support. You need the person to bounce ideas off of. You need that. We found on Carrie Pilby that we did that very well together. It was a very difficult movie. All indie movies are difficult. It was difficult, but we came out of it. If there were disagreements or things, we got through them together. We leaned on each other. We encouraged each other, and we made something great together. So having that is really important. And I think, I can tell you, Susan Kartsonas had this idea to have a company making films for the female audience, a film fund, and she was doing it alone. And she said it was very lonely. It was just too hard. And also it inspires confidence in investors when you have partners, so that, God forbid something happened to her, So anyway, so she learned that lesson, and she's sort of reinvented herself in midlife as well, after having been a studio executive. And so this is a new chapter for her as well. So she and I are learning the same lessons at the same time.
I also want to point out that you're a mom of 2 kids. Your daughter, who I've met, Kate, is headed for college. I have to say, a brilliant young woman.
Thank you.
And you have a young son still at home. You've worked the entire time.
I have. Yeah. It's not always easy. Luckily, I have a great partner in my husband who, we get through it together. And of course, you get help when you need it. And, every movie's been different. The last 3 films I've made have been made entirely in New York. So I'm there for about 6 months straight, and there's not much free time. So you don't see your kids a lot. It's very hard to go home and visit when you're making a movie. So they come to you. But even then, you're so all consumed with it. It's difficult.
Do you ever second guess yourself? I just know, yes. For me, when, sorry, I don't mean to bring up a rough patch, but I just remember for me, I was working. And then at one point my mom looked at me, and it was a game changer. She said to me, and this just, I don't even know if I've told her this, but it just sunk in, and it changed things for me. She looked at me one time and she said, I'm sure she said first, "You're not getting any younger," but she actually looked at me, and I think the thing she said was, This time's going really, really quickly with the kids, and it's not going to come again. They're going to be gone one day, and they're gone for good.
Mm.
And that, for some reason,
Mm-hmm.
encouraged me or caused me to really rethink my career and take a couple of years off. And I did, and I'm glad I did. And I started working.
Yeah.
I think it was a total of 5 years I didn't work. I worked at the home.
Yeah.
Believe me, they put me to work.
Yeah.
I was in the car in the 405 and the 101
Believe
a lot.
me,
No, it's not. But I mean, my career, I put it on the back burner. Do you ever second guess yourself or think about that?
I do. The bright side of making movies is you're on, fully for a long period of time, but then in between you do have time off. So I've always tried to really take advantage of the time that I'm off and that I don't have to be somewhere, at an office or, reporting somewhere, and I can spend more time with the kids. But yeah, I mean, I think what happens for a lot of women, or at least happens for me, is that you end up feeling like you're not doing anything well enough. You're not being a good enough parent. You're not being a good enough career person. But, I've learned to give myself a break, and I think we all do the best we can. But yeah, the time goes so fast. And, I do think, I know that in my case, it's been inspiring to my daughter to watch me work. And it's, she's very driven and, has, big goals. And so, yes, I think it was probably hard sometimes growing up, but I think for the most part, honestly, she got through okay. And I think it was mostly a positive thing.
And how has that worked with your husband? I mean, are you a modern marriage? You divvy up, you got to be divvying up the chores. I mean, he's got to be carrying some.
Yeah, we divvy up
I love
the
him
chores.
already.
No, he's fantastic.
I want his number.
Yeah, he's great. And, and we, when I made It's Complicated, was it It's Complicated? Yes, when I made It's Complicated in New York, I brought Jack, who's now 9, with me because he was too little to leave here. So, Kate stayed home with Rick, and there was a nanny, and then I had a nanny named my mom in New York. She moved in with us. We got an apartment in the city, and just made an experience of it. And he got to go to Central Park and FAO Schwartz every day, so he was happy. So you just make the best of it. I mean, this job provides a lot of experiences that are unique and I think valuable. So I try to look at the bright side in that way.
There's always a lot of talk about, it's getting so much better in Hollywood. Women, there are more women directing and more women in charge, and women are making more because, they're complaining. And I don't think they're still making the same amount as men in front of the camera or behind. But tell me your thoughts on that.
There's a lot of talk about the lack of female directors, which certainly is a problem. But I believe that the problem begins with the fact that there aren't enough female financiers that have, you have to provide the funding to the producers in order to, and then that will naturally, create diversity and inclusion in terms of gender and race, frankly. Women, it's known that women are they create a more inclusive and diverse workplace. Mm-hmm. So, it's a frustrating thing. The statistics are that women buy 51% of movie tickets. Right. And they estimate they account for like 10 to 15% more of the buying decisions because they make the decision in a date situation and they decide for families and kids.
That surprises me. I haven't heard that statistic.
It's absolutely true. And
why are we seeing so many male-oriented movies with bombings and blow-up?
So
I hate to sound so negative.
No,
but it's always like I always say to my husband and my 2 sons, I'm like, I don't want to watch it if people are getting murdered, blown up,
right.
The cars exploding, the building exploding. I've already seen that a million times.
Yeah. You want to see people movies, and that's the entire
and movies that make me think about things and inspire me or teach me something. I'm really into documentaries. Now that there's Netflix, that's been a real change for my viewing habits.
No, it's very frustrating, and and the other part of that statistic is that Hollywood only makes 18% of films aimed at women. So those kinds of movies you just described, and so that's the entire mission of our company is to address this issue and to change it and to move the needle.
And I want to get into it, but I want to circle back. Why is that with women making the buying decisions? Is it because the studios are headed by males?
Yes, and it's long-standing institutional gender bias, frankly. And I mean, it's a mystery, to be honest with you. No one really knows the answer as to why the distribution side of the house, we've talked to many distribution, mostly men, who understand that these kinds of movies are counter-programming to the sequels and the tent poles and the action movies that you were just describing. And they need them. And they're a massive financial opportunity, and still Hollywood just is leaving money on the table. It's a mystery. It's very frustrating. And I'm trying to look at it, though, as an opportunity. Business-wise.
Oh, gosh, completely. Completely. I mean, I can't wait to see what you come out with. And as a matter of fact, there's a movie that you're going to be shooting in early 2018. Tell me a little bit about that. And that's this is going to be the first film that's under the Resonate banner.
The first film under Resonate's banner. It's called Give or Take. It's a comedy drama, and it's a story, something that happened to a friend of mine, very loosely based on that I've wanted to tell for 20 years. I finally found the right collaborator and a brilliant young writer named Gabriel Mizrahi. The film, we took 2 years to develop the script. The script's just placed in the Nickel, top 50 of the Nickel Fellowship out of, I think, 7,000 submitted scripts.
What is the Nickel Fellowship?
It's the Academy's screenwriting competition. So it's very prestigious. It's a wonderful story that I'm excited that I'm actually going to direct. I'm producing and directing.
And that's really huge. There just aren't many women directors.
Yeah. No, I'm very excited about it. I was lucky enough to watch Nancy for 20 years, and I learned a lot, and I've worked with some of the most talented actors, in the business, and so I'm very lucky. I feel, again, sort of terrified, but also excited and exhilarated, and this will be another chapter for me. And I'm when I developed this story, I thought, I don't have the desire to just direct anything. I want to direct something that I want to see. And so the barometer for me was, what is the movie that if I see the trailer, I and all of my friends have to go that weekend? And that's the kind of movie this is. So that's the goal. And that's why we're so excited about it as the first project on our slate.
Gosh, there's so many challenges to being a filmmaker now. I love movies, and yet, there's so many good ones that I don't see. When we first met, you told me about Carrie Pilby.
Yes.
And I, hadn't heard about it. I hadn't seen a trailer. It hadn't been exposed to me.
Right.
And as I told you, I watched it, and I thought it was just darling, particularly the young actress. What was her name?
Belle Powley. She's such a talent.
So talented.
Incredible.
But it also had like Nathan Lane in there. And, there were some other big names.
Yeah.
Talk to me about those challenges of exposing your work to people. I mean, with so much competition and so much on the television that you can order up, how does a filmmaker now go about
marketing your movie?
Yeah, marketing your movie.
It's difficult. You hopefully partner with a good distributor who's smart about marketing and puts, some money behind the P&A, the prints and advertising. Now it's Carrie Pilby had a theatrical release, but it was a smaller theatrical release, and it was primarily a digital release. It was the #1 movie on iTunes for 6 weeks running.
And when we first talked about that, I went, oh, so it wasn't successful. I mean, that shows you how much I know about the movie business. Right. And you said, no, it actually was.
Yeah. So that's sort of the new paradigm. I'm getting used to it myself. I'm used to movies that are opened on, 3,000 screens across the country. But, as you said, the landscape is changing now. It's very much about iTunes and Netflix, and it's interesting. Netflix actually purchased our movie in addition to having the initial theatrical and digital release. So it just changes the entire construct, and it's the way of the world, and we all have to get used to it. I still think that there's room for the theatrical, and that people still enjoy going to the theater.
I think I see in you that I think that one of the reasons why you're so successful is you're able to adapt and kind of do new things. I mean, I look at you raising money for Carrie Pilby. Goodness gracious, you had worked with Warner Brothers and Sony, and you did a Kickstarter campaign. That really surprised me.
Yeah.
I was like, Suzanne, you shouldn't have to be doing that.
I know.
But you did.
We did it to, you know why we did that? We did that to raise the money we did it for a few reasons. There was a fan base of the novel. So we wanted to activate that fan base. And that became it helped us in finding the bigger money, because it was a proof of concept. There's an audience who craves this movie and wants to see it made. So that helped us. And then we raised, we set out to raise $50,000, not a lot. Ended up making $75,000, but that paid for the script that we owned and a casting director and just things that, yes, we could have all put our own money into it, but instead we did it that way. And then it was a bit of an early publicity campaign, and those followers and those people who donated have followed us throughout the experience of making the movie. So that's been really gratifying and fun. So of course that Kickstarter money wasn't going to get the movie made. We then had to go out and find the real money, which was more challenging, but we did it.
Yeah.
And now we're raising money for Resonate, and so it's that experience led me to now the experience that I'm having now and raising money for the company. So it's been an education.
So, Suzanne, I end every She Says with 3 takeaways. And those are basically things that I want I keep thinking our viewers. They're not viewers, they're listeners. Get over that. I got to get on the listener bandwagon. That I like our listeners to think about,
Okay.
because women, so many women are thinking about kicking off new beginnings and new chapters. I'm going to give 2, and then you help me on the 3rd. My takeaway from chatting with you today is finding the right partner, because I think that was really material in you forming your own company and really launching. Not being afraid to try new things. I look at you as a pretty fancy lady.
Thank you.
No, I mean, we put labels on people, but you're a Hollywood movie producer.
Yeah.
And yet I see you kind of doing Kickstarter and learning. I mean, clearly you learned to raise money. You had to be asking some questions. You weren't worried about somebody saying, wow, man, Suzanne, she's really stupid. You had to figure out how to do that. That's
I
huge.
did.
So not being afraid to learn new things. What would the 3rd takeaway be for our listeners?
Push through the fear. It's always going to be scary. And I think the fear is a good sign, frankly. It's pushing yourself to do, well, I guess that kind of falls under pushing yourself to do new things, but it's going to be scary. It's going to be, there were times when it would have been a lot easier just to give up, but pushing through the fear and coming out the other side, that will just bolster your confidence and will inspire the next thing and really launch you. And believe you can do it. Believe in yourself. Believe in you can do it, and understand the value that you have. And if you're in midlife, and you have experience, you have things that are valuable. Whatever your field is, you do at this stage in life. So, dream it, do it.
I love that. Suzanne, I have enjoyed absolutely every moment of this. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Linda. It was so much fun.
And thanks for listening to us today. I got it right, listeners, not viewers. If you want to hear more episodes of She Says, go to SheSez.com. You can download one episode and give it a whirl, or you can subscribe to the entire season of 10, our first season. You can also go to iTunes on Apple. And, podcasts are awesome while you're cooking dinner, while you're walking your dog, while you're gardening, even while you're working or your husband or kids are talking to you. You can listen to a podcast. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. Thanks so much for joining us.